It is time to look at our college football power rankings. According to our very own Brandon Marcello, we've reached the midway point in college football. We have Indiana sitting at number 1 after getting arguably the biggest win for many teams so far this season, beating Oregon at Oregon. Miami, they drop a spot now to number 2 after being on a bye, and then we have the defending champs sitting at number 3 in the Ohio State Buckeyes. Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia. We got 3 SEC teams to rattle off there before we get to Texas Tech, then A&M. Oregon dropping to number 9 after that loss to Indiana, and then Tennessee rounding out the top 10. Let's welcome in Brandon Marcello, the maker of the list, alongside Danny Kanell as we kind of work through these power rankings. Indiana sitting there at number 1, the best win of the season probably of any team so far. They go into Oregon, put on a performance like that. So, Brandon, how impressed were you with Indiana? Because there were certainly doubters for what IU could do there at Oregon.
Yeah, I don't want to hear any more doubt. Look at the front 7 on defense for Indiana and just how they get after it. They're phenomenal. We all want to focus on the quarterback and the offense and the numbers they could put up in Indiana, and that's great. But the reason why they've been able to play like a number 1 team is because of the upgrades they made along that defense, especially defensive front, the veteran leadership they have there. They absolutely just ravaged Oregon. And what's crazy to think is that Indiana won 30-20, and they did so despite their quarterback, who's in the Heisman race, throwing a pick 6 on the road. Indiana was a great closing team in this one. That's been like kind of their thing that we had issues with last season. Indiana with the best win in the entire season, and to do it on the road, going across the country, by the way, against an Oregon team that had yet to lose a Big Ten game since joining the conference, had a massive winning streak at home. Yes, Indiana is my number 1 with a bullet.
I love that you have them at number 1. I don't think Ohio State fans will feel the same. I'm sure you've already heard about it on social media, but I agree with everything you've said. I mean, how can you not give them the credit for what they've done so far? And I thought it was interesting because I talked to Curt Cignetti last week, and I asked him what the difference was between last year's kind of what did he learn from losing against Ohio State and losing to Notre Dame. And I was expecting some X's and O's, something he might have taken away. And he said, no, he said, I realized we didn't have enough dogs. I mean, that was his answer. And they go out and get Wheeler and Wyatt to bolster up that defensive line. They go out and get a center from Notre Dame to where all of a sudden there's not that disparity. We already knew what they could do. Like, quarterback was not the question mark. Receiver wasn't the question mark. But what was most impressive to me was physicality. They went toe-to-toe and even looked like the more physically superior team on the field in Eugene. That, to me, is what is so impressive. And you mentioned that being the singular win of the season. I totally agree. And with Ohio State, if any Ohio State fan is out there, and they've come at me too, like, they did have a common opponent. They both played Illinois. And who was more impressive in that one? It's not even close, with Indiana dropping 63 against Illinois in that completely lopsided affair. And Ohio State still did win comfortably. But if you're taking into consideration common opponents, we've got one, and Indiana was way more impressive. I love that you've got them there. I was actually surprised there were only 3 first-place votes for Indiana. I think that has more to do with the helmet on the side of the head than it does about anything. But that was a wow performance for Indiana.
I'm certainly not surprised that Curt Cignetti is saying we don't have enough dogs and not talking X's and O's. We know he's always good for a good soundbite, if anything. So Indiana is now the 4th team to be number 1 in these power rankings. If we go back to the preseason, we've had Texas there, Ohio State, Miami, and now Indiana. So it gets me excited, Brandon, about what's to come down the line for the CFP. But what does it tell you about what's ahead?
Craziness. I would be surprised if Indiana's number 1 all the way down the stretch, even if they keep winning. And the reason why I say that is because of the schedule. There's potential here for Ohio State if it keeps winning with some stronger, quote-unquote, conference opponents, that Ohio State might end up overtaking them. Also depends, of course, on how Indiana performs, even in wins. We talk about style points. Style points do matter in my power rankings right now. There will probably be more changes. I think the one mistake I've made this year, other than, Texas, but whatever. But the other thing is that taking Miami down off the top spot there for that 1 week, I overreacted a little bit based off of Oregon going into Penn State and beating Penn State, and I started shuffling some things there. but I shouldn't have done so. I should have kept Miami number 1 going into this week, but Indiana would have supplanted them either way.
Yeah, I think this is awesome. I think it's great for college football. And I'll tell you what I've learned. I'm never emphatically going to make any statements because a week ago I was sitting here saying those top 3 teams, which at the time were Miami, Ohio State, and Oregon, I was like, oh, they feel like they're separating from the field. Now all of a sudden we've got Indiana inserted in there. I do think even at the top, there could be another surprise upset or two that we could see a little bit of shakeup. It's hard to say when it'll come, but we just saw Penn State 15 days ago was sitting on top of the college football world, and here we are today with their coach fired, and they've had back-to-back losses as 21-point favorites. Like, I just think that's sort of the new norm, is you really can't trust anybody. Yeah, I think Ohio State, Indiana, Miami are that much better. I think they're going to be favored in almost every game remaining on their schedule. But do I trust them to go through unscathed? No, just because of the sort of the season that's unfolded.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Life comes at you fast. To your point, Danny, talking about Penn State, because the conversation preseason and now is certainly drastically different. Want to get to Oregon. They're still within the top 10, but they fall to number 9 after losing at home to Indiana. Dante Moore, we saw him struggle. He threw 2 picks. So, Brandon, do you still think this is a team that's capable of winning the Big Ten and beyond that?
Oh, yes, I think so. Depending on how everything else shakes out, of course, around them, but I still think they got the pieces together. Remember, Dante Moore, this is his first year as a starter. They're going to retool some things around him to put him in some better positions to play and be able to excel. But we hadn't seen that all season so far from him, the struggles and the interceptions. But also, let's give a lot of credit to the Indiana defense. As I mentioned earlier in the segment, they are phenomenal. They're not getting enough credit out there nationally. We're all focusing on Indiana's offense. That defense is great as well. I think Dante Moore will improve on this. Look, he went on the road at Penn State. I know Penn State's not a top 25 team right now. They don't have a head coach, but that was still an impressive victory on the road, being able to lead them in a whiteout situation there with the crowd and pick up a victory. I got still a lot of confidence in Oregon. They're still in my top 10. They're still in the playoff picture, obviously, and they're still in the Big Ten title race. But, man, it's going to be very hard to sit back there and hope and pray that Ohio State and Indiana end up getting another loss on their schedule.
Yeah, I feel like Oregon still is there. I will say I want to see how Dante Moore bounces back from this. He's been everybody's favorite QB until this moment. Now you've got to respond to some adversity. Your confidence could be impacted. And I do think their schedule all of a sudden looks a little bit trickier. That road trip to Iowa. Remember, Iowa had Indiana in a fourth quarter game. Indiana took that safety late, to win there by 5 as opposed to 1 touchdown. USC all of a sudden looks better, but that isn't Eugene. And keep an eye on that game in Seattle. That has been Dan Lanning's one of the tougher opponents he's had to face in his tenure there at Oregon. I wouldn't be surprised if Oregon slips up again, but at 10-2, I still think they're a playoff team.
And you mentioned it, Danny. USC, that game just became that much more interesting because they're, just beating Michigan, now up to number 16 in your power rankings, Brandon. They have another big matchup ahead against Notre Dame. They've put up 30-plus points in each game. So, Brandon, do you think they're going to continue to do that, build upon this moving forward as they have a Notre Dame coming up shortly?
My concern, of course, is the running back depth. They lost Wayman Jordan for the next 4 to 6 weeks. He's having tightrope surgery actually today. He got carted off the field in that win against Michigan, but then they had a walk-on come in and rush for nearly 140 yards. But the problem is there's not much depth around that position. They're going to be more pressure there on Jaden Mayava to throw the football. Also, that defense needs to continue to get better. I was really impressed with them with Michigan. I know Michigan, they want to kind of believe that they're a team that can throw the ball a little bit more than they have in the past, but USC was pretty good in being able to make them like a single-dimension team there. But USC, I think, is for real. They're deserving of being just outside that top 15. I think it's a mess right now when you try to look at teams ranked from about 13 all the way down to about 21, 22. I think you can move any of those teams around in my power rankings, but that was an impressive win. It was a win that was by a wider margin than what we saw Oklahoma had against Michigan earlier in the season, and USC was beat up a little bit. Let's also remember, USC played without 2 starting offensive linemen in this game, and they were still able to beat up on Michigan there in LA. USC finally getting back there, and if not for that very close loss against Illinois, which, by the way, I was impressed with USC on the road in that game as well, USC might very well be trying to knock on the door as a top 10 team right now.
You're right. I mean, this is a playoff elimination game. USC has next. If Notre Dame loses that, there's no more margin. They're done with their third loss. And USC, it almost feels like it is for them, although they could still be in the Big Ten title race. But I thought that win was so ginormous for Lincoln Riley. And it'll be a case of what have you done for me lately? Because now they have to go take this on the road as an 8.5-point underdog against Notre Dame. But I just wonder if that was sort of a mental hurdle for USC to get past. After the game, he said that felt like a Big Ten win. And I know Notre Dame is not a Big Ten team, but it's going to feel like another battle of heavyweights. And I thought their freshman stepped up pretty well in King Miller, who did have all those, yards rushing, stepping in Waymon Jordan's absence. And Jaden Maeva is the type of quarterback that can put this team on his back and carry them if it does get into a little bit more of a shootout type game. So I think it's going to be really fun, but I love where you have USC. I think they're a team that's been kind of flying under the radar. They get that weight off their chest of beating one of those signature teams from the Big Ten. Watch out for USC. I think they could be a tough out this week for Notre Dame.
All right, Brandon and Danny, we certainly appreciated going through Brandon's power rankings, where Indiana is the new #1 team, followed by Miami, and then, of course, Ohio State rounding out the top 3. In the meantime, make sure you check out the Cover 3 podcast. Danny Kanell is on there with the crew, always talking about the very latest headlines happening in college sports. You can watch right now by scanning that QR code on your screen.